They thought I wouldn't do it. They really believed I'd just let it go. My husband married my sister and moved her into the house I bought with the lavender. I planted the curtains, I hemmed the roof, I paid off. They toasted on my porch like it was theirs. So I signed one paper and made them both homeless. Where are you listening from? Drop your city, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of betrayal and revenge. My name is Delaney Brooks. I'm 41. And for most of my life, I've been the quiet one, the fixer, the dependable daughter, the sister who never forgot birthdays, the wife who always said, "It's okay, I'll handle it." I live in Cranston, Rhode Island. Not the city part out where the map starts to blur into trees and winding roads, where people know your dog's name but forget to ask how you're doing. The house sits just past a bend on Lilac Road. 2 floors, pale cedar siding, porch swing that creaks if you sit too hard on the left side. It wasn't much when I bought it, but I made it mine. Every tile, every coat of paint, the lavender by the steps. Planted it the week after Dad died. He always said lavender was a scent that forgives. I didn't know what he meant until years later. I met Evan at a gallery opening. He had a paintbrush tucked behind one ear and asked if I wanted to see what color silence looks like. I should have known right then. He was 4 years older, said structure made him nervous, but he liked how I made chamomile tea and paid my bills on time. We got married a year later. I paid for the wedding. He painted the place cards. That's how it always was. I handled things. He floated. And I didn't mind. At least I thought I didn't. Tessa, my little sister. She was always light, 7 years younger. Used to hold my hand under the table when Mom and Dad fought. I taught her how to braid her hair, how to drive, how to parallel park without panicking. When she dropped out of college after a bad breakup, she moved into our guest room. Cried for 3 weeks straight. Evan made her soup once. She called him the brother she never had. I never questioned it. I mean, why would I? Tessa was the one person who truly knew me. She saw me go through everything. She was everything. Sometimes I look back and wonder when the lines started to blur. Maybe it was the year Evan stopped painting. He said the light in his studio made him feel trapped. Started going out more. Clearing his head, he said. Tessa would say, "Let him breathe, Laney. Artists need air." Maybe it was the night I came home and the kitchen smelled like her apple crumble, but I hadn't baked. She had. Her shoes were by the door, his jacket on the hook. I remember thinking, I'm not being replaced. I'm just invisible. But I still didn't say anything, because that's what I'd always done. Held it all together. Until the morning I woke up and saw the envelope on the counter. A wedding invite. Their names printed together in silver foil. Evan and Tessa. No return address, just a sticky note. But we didn't want to tell you until it was official. Hope you'll understand. They moved into the house 3 weeks later. The house I paid for. The deed still in my name. And every time I drove past that porch and saw them drinking coffee like it was just another Sunday, a piece of me cracked. Until one day, I stopped cracking. Anne started planning. It was a Thursday night. Tessa called it a casual dinner, just family. I almost didn't go. But some part of me wanted to see how far they'd fallen into the delusion. She opened the door like nothing ever happened. Like she hadn't crawled into my life, borrowed my sweaters, slept in the bed down the hall, and then married the man who once kissed my forehead when I fell asleep grading client files. Laney, she beamed. Come in, it's just us. Evan's making that pasta you love. That pasta, my recipe, of course. I stepped inside. The house looked the same rug I bought in Vermont, same chipped vase I fixed with glue and a prayer. But something felt wrong, off, like I'd walked into a copy of my own life, a cheaper, colder replica. Evan barely looked at me, just nodded from the kitchen. Tessa poured wine. Here's to new beginnings, she smiled, and to always being family, no matter what paths we take. I stared at her. Family. She took my husband, moved into my home, turned every inch of my silence into her stage. And she had the audacity to raise a glass as if she hadn't carved me out of my own bloodline. I took a sip, didn't flinch, didn't scream. But inside something shifted. Not anger, not jealousy. Just resolve. If they could sit in my chair, sip from my glasses, call this house theirs, then I could do one simple thing: remind them who really owned the keys. It was early Sunday, the kind where the light hasn't decided if it wants to stay. I parked down the street, didn't want them to see me, didn't even know why I came. But my feet found their way up the old path anyway, stone by stone, like muscle memory. The lavender was still there. Overgrown, a little wild but alive. I knelt beside it, ran my fingers through the stalks. They smelled like everything I used to believe in. Forgiveness, fresh starts, home. Tessa had put a new welcome mat on the porch. It said, "Love lives here." Cheap script, still had the fold line down the middle. But underneath the floorboard still squeaked on the left, just like it did when I came home late carrying takeout and 2 coffees, hoping Evan had finished just one new canvas. He hadn't. I stepped back, looked up at the window, the one above the sink. Curtains were new, bright pink, too bright. But the tiny crack in the corner of the glass, still there from the time Tessa slammed it shut during a storm and cried because she thought she'd ruined something I loved. I told her it's okay, the crack's small, I'll fix it later. But I never did. I stood there for a long time. Not angry, not hurt, just stunned by how little they'd changed, how much of me still lived in that house, how they were living inside my history like squatters in my soul. And that's when I knew I didn't want revenge, I wanted return. Not of love, not of loyalty, just of space. Space to breathe again without walking through the ghosts of my own making. The email came at 7:42 a.m., subject line, annual mortgage statement. I hadn't opened one in months, not since I left, not since they moved in, but something pulled me toward it. Maybe curiosity, maybe intuition, maybe the need to know that my name still existed somewhere. I clicked. There it was. Delaney C. Brooks, on every single page. Owner, borrower, primary contact. The house on Lilac Road, still mine. They hadn't changed a thing. They couldn't. Because they never asked. Never signed. Never even thought to check. They assumed I'd rolled over, assumed that my silence meant surrender. But silence isn't forgetting. It's record-keeping. I scrolled down. Interest breakdown, escrow balance, upcoming tax adjustments. And then a red flag. No payments received since March. That was the month they moved in. The month they toasted in my kitchen and called themselves a fresh start. The mortgage autopay. Still linked to my old account. Still drawing from the fund I hadn't touched since the day I walked away with nothing but a duffel bag and my journal. They were living off me. Still, sleeping in the master bedroom I painted sage green, watering the plants I rooted from clippings, drinking from the chipped mug Evan gave me on our 5th anniversary. But I was the one getting the bills. I was the one holding up a roof for 2 people who couldn't even spell respect. If you spotted them, the R and the E. I stared at the screen, didn't blink. My hand hovered over the mouse. I clicked download full statement, then forward to attorney, then I sat back, exhaled, and whispered, "Let's begin." Mom called me that evening, said she'd heard from Tessa, said I'd been distant, said it was time to stop holding on to anger. I didn't speak, just listened, like I always did. She went on. Tessa's still young, she made a mistake. They're trying to build a life now. You're her big sister, Delaney. You're supposed to set the example. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. All my life, I'd set the example. I took care of Tessa when Mom couldn't get out of bed. I worked 2 jobs so she wouldn't have to drop out of college. I drove her to therapy, when she couldn't stop crying after Ryan left. And now, after she moved into my house with my husband, I was still the one being asked to make peace. Mom continued, "Let it go, sweetheart. The world doesn't need another scandal in the family." That word, scandal, hung in the air like smoke, as if I was the problem, as if the betrayal only became real when it risked making someone uncomfortable. I almost laughed, but it came out a breath too sharp, a sound too close to grief. "Did you ask if I was okay?" I said. Silence. "Then we just want everyone to move on." I closed my eyes. I saw the cracked window, the lavender, the chipped mug, the mortgage in my name. I saw myself holding up this family with both hands bleeding, and all they saw was a woman too proud to let go. So I did. I let go of their expectations, of their comfort, of their ability to define my worth. That night I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't try to explain. I just opened my laptop, pulled up the deed, and typed one sentence into the email. "I'm ready to sell." I told myself I was only stopping by to grab an old box of tax files from the attic. The buyers weren't moving in for another week. The house was technically still mine. Legally, emotionally, that part was more complicated. I didn't plan to look around, didn't want to feed the part of me still hoping for traces of apology. But the second I stepped inside, the air wrapped around me like memory. Same wood scent, same faint creak in the hallway, same echo of a home that had once held a version of me so loyal it bordered on extinction. I headed upstairs, opened the attic door, and there it was, a stack of boxes I had labeled years ago, and right on top, Evan's old sketchbook. Leather-bound, edges frayed, still smelled like ink and dust. I hesitated, then opened it. The first page stopped my breath, a charcoal portrait of me. Hair pinned back, eyes drawn sharp, lips mid-thought, but half of it erased. Smudged aggressively, as if he couldn't decide if I was a woman to remember or a mistake to forget. The next page, Tessa. Laughing, lighter strokes, unfinished lines. Dozens of her, in profile, at rest, naked in one. But none with weight, none with shadow, just outlines, hints, as if she was easier to sketch because she never required depth. I closed the book slowly, hands steady, heart not, and in that moment I understood. Evan didn't pick Tessa because she was more beautiful. He chose her because she was simpler. Less reflection, less resistance. No past to confront, no mirror to hold up. Me, I was too much canvas, too much voice, too much truth. But funny how even when they erase you, they still use your face to start the sketch. People think the moment of no return is loud, like a slammed door, a broken plate, a scream in the dark. But mine was quiet. A soft click of the mouse, a whispered yes on the phone, a pause, followed by resolve. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't plotting to ruin them. I wasn't interested in pain. I just wanted my house back. The one I built, the one I bled for, the one that held the version of me before I became invisible. When I first bought it, I couldn't afford the down payment in full, so I cashed out my small retirement, skipped 3 birthdays for myself, said no to every vacation. I remember painting the walls at midnight with Evan asleep on the couch and Tessa humming along to some song on her phone as she passed me the roller. They weren't just people. They were parts of that house, etched into it like fingerprints in cement. But here's the thing about ownership. It doesn't ask for permission. It just waits for you to reclaim it. My lawyer was direct. You don't need their consent to sell. Your name is the only one on the title. I nodded. It might get messy, he added. I said nothing. Because what they'd done to me wasn't messy. It was surgical, precise, a clean betrayal. So I moved clean too. Found a buyer, young couple, pregnant. She ran her hand over the banister and said, "I can feel how loved this place is." I almost told her, almost said, "Not all love is gentle." But I smiled instead. Let her believe in new beginnings. We set the date, signed the papers. The buyer asked will the previous residents be okay with 30 days' notice. I didn't answer because I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the moment the envelope would hit their porch. The exact second they'd realize this house never belonged to them. They just borrowed it from someone who finally remembered who she was. It arrived at 10:02 a.m., signed, sealed, certified. One envelope, thin as a letter, heavy as a hammer. The 30-day notice sat on the welcome mat right above the word love. Irony has a sense of humor like that. They didn't open it right away. I know that because the neighbor's doorbell cam caught the moment. Tessa stepped outside in slippers, coffee in hand, and saw the envelope lying there like a dare. She picked it up with one hand, sipped her drink with the other, didn't even flinch. Not yet. Evan came out next. No shoes, still in that robe I once gave him for our third Christmas. I had stitched his initials on the cuff. He said something, I couldn't hear it. Then she handed him the letter. I watched him read, his brow furrowed, then froze, then dropped. The mug shattered on the porch. They didn't look at each other. They looked at the house, as if it had betrayed them. But walls don't lie. Papers don't play sides. And deeds, they don't forget who signed them first. My phone buzzed a minute later. Evan Brooks, missed call. Then again, then a voicemail. Delaney, this is cruel. You can't just, this isn't Tessa's crying. We didn't know. Can we talk? No, Evan, you knew. You just thought I wouldn't act. That I'd keep being the woman who paid, who patched, who stayed. But that version of me, she packed her bags the day you gave my life to someone who used to braid her hair in my bathroom mirror. She showed up at my door 3 days later. No warning, no apology, just rage wrapped in perfume. I didn't open it at first. Watched her through the side window, arms crossed, lip trembling, wearing that blue cable knit sweater I thought I lost last winter. It used to be mine. Now it was stretched across the chest of a woman who had taken everything I never thought I'd have to protect. I opened the door, just a crack. Tessa didn't wait. You're a monster, she spat. I blinked, said nothing. You sold the house out from under us. We don't even have time to find a new place. How could you be so cold? I looked at her, really looked. The girl I once carried across a flood-soaked street in 5th grade. The teenager who begged to sleep in my bed after her first heartbreak. The woman who now stood in front of me like I was the villain in a story she rewrote. You didn't tell me, she said, softer, as if betrayal came with a grace period. I didn't need to, I replied. My name was on the deed. Not yours, not his, not ours, just mine. She opened her mouth, closed it, then whispered, I thought you loved me. I could have said I did, that I always had, that I still did in a way that hurt worse than hate. But love doesn't mean handing over your spine, so I said nothing. She stood there for a moment, waiting for a crack in my armor. There wasn't one. Then she did the only thing she could think to do. She tugged at the sleeve of my old sweater like it could still wrap her in warmth, like threads could undo what she'd broken, but it didn't fit her right. Never did. That's the thing about stolen things. They never feel like home. So I shut the door, not with anger, just finality. And on the other side, Tessa finally met the silence she thought would always forgive her. The email came 2 days after they left. Just a short message from the realtor. FYI, found this among the leftover mail on the kitchen counter. Attached was a scanned receipt, a storage unit rental, 2-month lease, paid in cash. The address was on the edge of town, past the gas station with the flickering O, and that diner we used to stop at when the power went out. I wasn't planning to go, but on a cloudy afternoon, I found myself driving there, not to confront, not to linger. Just to look. The unit was locked. Nothing dramatic, just a number, just a padlock, just another box of endings. But from the narrow side window, I could make out a few shapes. A rolled-up rug, his old easel leaning awkwardly to one side, my grandmother's end table paint peeling on the leg, and taped to one box a photo, curled at the edges, faded. Me and Tessa, aged 10 and 3, matching overalls, cheeks sticky from popsicles, her hand holding mine. I stood there for a long time, didn't cry, didn't knock, just stared at the box holding all the things they didn't want but couldn't quite throw away. And I realized something. Even when people try to discard you, pieces of you still haunt their storage units. They moved out 2 days before the deadline. Didn't tell me. Didn't need to. The realtor texted, "Place is cleared. A few broken blinds, a cracked mirror in the guest room. But otherwise, they're gone." I didn't reply. What was there left to say? No more voicemails. No more guilt-laced messages. No more performative regret. Just silence, and in that silence I found something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not victory, but weightlessness. Evan didn't beg again. Tessa never came back. Even Mom fell quiet. I guess it's easier to disappear than to face a woman who finally chose herself. I stayed in the small apartment for a few more weeks. Then one morning, I woke up, opened the window, and realized I didn't want to lease space in someone else's world anymore. So I found a tiny cottage near Wickford. Just one bedroom, fenced garden, a rusted mailbox with a crooked flag that I painted back to red. No attic full of old lives, no room for echoes, just room for lavender. I planted it on a Monday, hands in the soil, knees in the dirt, sun warm on my neck. Same seeds, same scent. But something was different, because this time I wasn't planting to remember anyone, or to forgive anyone. I was planting so something would finally grow just for me. It happened on a Tuesday, clouds low, air thick with coming rain. I reached for the cabinet out of habit and pulled down 2 mugs, one chipped on the handle, the other still etched with a fading E. My fingers paused. I used to make 2 cups without thinking, one with lemon, no sugar, one with honey and a stir that never clinked too loud. But that morning I set the second mug back, not with sadness, just release. I brewed a single cup, poured slowly, listened to the water hit ceramic like a clock ticking into a new hour. I sat at my desk, pulled out the old leather-bound journal, the one I hadn't opened since before the invite. Before the laugh on the porch, before the word sister began to sound like sand in my mouth. The first page was blank. I picked up the pen, not because I had something poetic to say, not to vent, not even to write about them, but because the quiet inside me was finally big enough to hold my own voice. I wrote one line. Lavender never grows the same way twice, but it still comes back. I underlined it. Closed the journal, took a sip of tea. It was the last thing I did before closing the garden gate that evening. The air smelled like crushed mint and new rain. The lavender I planted had taken root. Not quite blooming, but standing. I walked back inside, sat at my desk, and opened a blank sheet of thick stationery. Not the journal. This one felt different. Not for reflection, for instruction. I dated the top corner, then wrote, "To the version of me who forgets." My hand paused, then kept going. You don't owe anyone your silence, not your sister, not a man who loved the easy version of you, not a family more concerned with image than injury. You are not difficult. You are deliberate, and that will always be too much for those who need women to be soft just so they can stay small. I signed it with just one initial et. Folded it twice, slipped it into a mason jar, screwed the lid on tight. Then barefoot I walked into the garden and buried it under the base of the lavender, 3 inches deep, not to hide it, but to ground it. A seed beneath the soil of myself. Maybe I'll never dig it up. Maybe I won't need to. But if I ever start to shrink again, ever begin bending to be understood, ever mistake betrayal for a test of love, I'll know where to find her. And she'll be waiting. No one to share it with, no one to explain it to, No one to disappoint, forgive, or carry. Just me, here, whole, and for the first time in years, not waiting to be heard. Just finally listening to myself.